Everyone. Welcome to the second panel. And we want to thank net.America and ICF for hosting this. This second panel is about public-private partnerships and career pathways, a very important topic for those of us in the workforce development area. And with us today, I want to take a minute and introduce our panel. So with us today, and they're all going to introduce themselves, make my life a little easier. I should first introduce myself. My name is Patty Moran. I think most people know who I am in the workforce development world. I started my career 18 years. I was the director of training for the Ford Motor Company, the Edison assembly plant. For those of you who remember Edison, they had a plant that made the Ranger pickup truck. And left there and dove into the community college world for many years. And then I was the assistant commissioner for workforce development under the Christie administration, worked as the director of apprenticeship for NJMEP, and now I'm a consultant working for myself. So been doing this consulting gig for about a little over 2.5 years, and I'm enjoying the variety of work I'm getting. So I want to take a minute now and now that you know who I am, I think I'm going to take a minute and go around and we'll have the panel talk. Okay, we're going to start with Andrew from PPPL. He's going to tell us about himself.
Thank you, Patty. Pleasure to be here with everybody on this panel. My name is Andrew Zwicker. I'm from the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, where officially my title is I'm the head of communications and public outreach. PPPL, as Patty said, is shorthand for our laboratory. We're about 650 people right in central New Jersey, and we're the United States Department of Energy's national laboratory for the development of fusion energy, which is the power source of the sun and all the stars. And if we can harness that by building machines on Earth, we will end up with a virtually unlimited, clean, safe, carbon-free source of electricity that will transform the world. It's the mission that ties us all together, whether we are building these machines, designing these machines, studying the results from it, or all the support that goes around it. To get to that point, we're a federally funded public laboratory, but our partnerships with the private sector are critically important. And in the last few years, what we've seen in particular in the development of fusion energy is an enormous increase in private investment. And so, like many new technologies, as we develop them in the public sector and then they move over to the private sector, we head towards commercialization, we're at an incredibly interesting time in this transformative energy source. And then finally, I'll say, because this is about workforce, creating and developing and nurturing the next generation of people who are responsible for building these incredibly complicated machines is one of our key missions. And we have started at PPPL the first United States Department of Labor registered apprenticeship program in fusion energy. Like so many other places, our workforce is aging, and we need a diverse, young, new workforce to ensure that we can develop this energy source. And so we just got this off the ground a couple of years ago. It's been wonderfully successful. And I'm just looking forward to the panel and the discussion that we have in front of us today. So thank you.
Great. That was great. Okay, I learned a lot there, Andrew. That was good. Okay, the next we have is Richard from IREC.
Hi, thank you. I'm Richard Lawrence, Program Director at IREC, which is the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. IREC is a nonprofit organization that operates nationally throughout the U.S. with a mission to bring in 100% clean energy future. We do this through 3 main category areas: our workforce development activities, which is the department I work in. I'll talk a little bit about some of our activities there, but we help make sure that there's a sufficient diverse workforce to meet the needs of the industry. And we work on regulatory as well. We are well known for a lot of our regulatory policies, best practices for things like interconnection and net metering. So we're involved with a lot of that work across the country, and also some local initiatives, which is getting engaged at the state and regional and local levels to implement policies. One of the projects we're well known for there is our Soul Smart program, which has recognized hundreds of communities across the country for their activities to promote solar energy in the region. So together with all this, we, small organization, but having a big impact, been around about 40 years now with the organization. I myself have been in the industry 20 years. My background is in education and training, have worked from nonprofits doing teacher education and training, working to get people that are doing training in the schools to make sure they're integrating renewable energy curriculum. Took that up, worked on some Department of Energy projects, getting colleges to implement solar training programs. Worked for the certification body, the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners for a while, and have been with IREC here for a few years now.
Great. Thank you, Richard. That was great. All right. In fact, I when you rang some bells with me, NABCEP, I remember that credential well that we really pushed for a while. Okay. Next, we have Marcus from Beyond Literacy.
Thank you, Pat. Again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be able to be here and explain a little bit about the work that Beyond Literacy is doing within the space. So my name is Marcus Hall, Director for Workforce Development for Beyond Literacy, and we are the largest federally funded Title II adult education provider that serves the city of Philadelphia. We generally serve about 1,500 adult learners per year. Most of the participants that we serve are generally those who are classified as like the hardest to place, individuals with like personal challenges to work. That may include those who have young children or experience difficulty accessing affordable or safe childcare. Others who may have mental health or substance abuse issues or criminal histories that may make it difficult to find work. Others who may have little or to no work experience and need help developing job readiness or learning skills to find jobs and succeed in the workplace. About 60% to 70% of our students don't have their high school diploma, so they're ultimately obviously working to not only earn that credential, but also boost their literacy and numeracy skills so they're able to move directly into these apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship programs. Recently, we've launched the Keystone Energy Employment Pipeline strategic initiative, which is designed as a pre-apprenticeship model to really be able to develop new creative career pathways to be able to get those who don't have their diploma or those who are who may have a history of struggling with proficiency in literacy and numeracy to be able to get those upskilling quickly to be able to qualify for many of these different employment opportunities, as well at the same time concurrently completing their GED requirements so they're able to have that credential and move directly into many of these programs. As many of you do know, that most of the apprenticeship or even the WIOA opportunities are not available to those who do not have a high school diploma. So to be able to have folks access these opportunities and access these services while working on completing that credential has been really important, and also very crucial for many of our employer partners who, as Andrew was mentioning, are experiencing significant shortages in terms of hiring or incapacity due to the aging of the workforce and just new skills that they're ultimately needing to develop. So really excited to be able to share some of the experiences that we have as part of our new program, and obviously work towards making sure that we have new initiatives and new strategies of being able to incorporate those who don't have a diploma, those who with criminal histories, those with substance or mental abuse, substance and mental issues, reintegrate them back into the workforce. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. That was great. Touched a lot of areas in workforce development there. The ex-offenders, those in literacy, those in welfare, those hardest to serve population, and getting them onto a career pathway. Really important. Okay, next we have Chris from the Maryland Department of Labor.
So good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Chris McLaren. I'm the director of the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Program. As mentioned, we're with the Maryland Department of Labor, and specifically within the Maryland's Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning, which is a division within the Department of Labor. Maryland is a state apprenticeship agency, and as such, on behalf of the U.S. Department of Labor, we approve, manage, monitor, assist, and do all the components of a registered apprenticeship system within the state of Maryland. Within Maryland, we have just over 11,250 apprentices, and we expect to cross somewhere around 11,500 or more this year. That's a dramatic growth over the last couple of years as we've increased the number of apprentices by about 40% since 2016. We have 180 plus active apprenticeship programs and thousands of employers that participate. as well as a robust youth apprenticeship program that covers 22 of Maryland's 24 school systems, with hundreds of youth apprentices participating across the state. We have apprentices in a range of occupations to include those in clean energy, but as well as apprenticeships in IT, cyber, and pretty much every construction trade you can imagine. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to talking to all of you as the day goes on.
Sounds exciting. A lot of the same language that we're all talking here in New Jersey. We're an OA state, or Office of Apprenticeship state, and it sounds like Maryland is a state-approved agent. Am I right? You're an SA state? Yep. Okay, so now to the questions. Okay, so the first question actually really touches on Chris here, on things he does. It says Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia gave the go-ahead to develop offshore wind farms. This was a seismic shift in electrical generation for those states. Chris, how did Maryland develop a public-private partnership to train the workforce needed by U.S. Wind and Ørsted at Sparrows Point in Baltimore? And was apprenticeship a key component in that development of the workforce?
Sure. So thanks. That's a great question. And I'll start by saying one of the things that makes registered apprenticeship so great and so dynamic is that it is flexible, it's industry driven, and it includes all the components needed by industry and by employers to develop the most highly skilled workforce, regardless of the occupation. But in particular about offshore wind. So the passage of the Maryland Offshore Wind Act, Energy Act of 2013, Maryland then had a regulatory framework to develop an offshore wind industry. So it's been about 9 years. And since that time, various state agencies, including the Maryland Energy Administration, the Maryland Department of Labor, and the Maryland Department of Commerce, have collaborated to assist and to bring in key private sector players, which would support the industry in developing offshore wind for both the workforce as well as for the state economy. In recognition of the importance of clean energy, Maryland utilizes a portion of our EARN funding. So EARN is a program within Maryland's Department of Labor, which stands for the Employment Advancement Right Now, acronym being EARN, in order to help the industry upskill workers for future growth. So EARN Maryland is state funded. It's a competitive workforce development grant program. It's industry-led. It's regional in focus. It's a proven strategy to help businesses both cultivate the skilled workforce they need, as well as to train them in order to compete. So it's flexible, it's innovative, grant-driven, state-funded. Governor Hogan committed $3 million just for green job training from fiscal years 2018 to 2020. Labor is administrating this fund, but we work with other partners to include the Maryland Energy Administration, who I mentioned a minute ago. We work together with businesses that engage both in developing the offshore wind farms as well as in the hiring, training, and producing the workforce that they'll need to do it. So that kind of collaboration is essential to do it. And where that, I think, also comes into the private-public partner relationship is that's what a registered apprenticeship program is. Employers, whether they're group programs driven through joint apprenticeship committees like large union-based programs or group non-joint programs, which can be led by an association without the involvement of a union, they're all training their employers' apprentices in order to get them the journey worker status to make sure that they're the most highly skilled and qualified, whether it's an electrician working on a wind farm or producing or installing solar panels, or whether it's an iron worker or a carpenter that's driving out piles in the ocean to put in an offshore wind platform. These training programs are able to shift pretty quickly to add in components of training in order to make sure that any specialized certifications or qualifications are needed. As you know, traveling out in the water, there's a host of special certifications and qualifications that must be included in the training program. And that's one of the reasons that the partnership becomes, so key in making sure that the moment U.S. Wind or Ørsted says we're ready to start dropping these in the water, we have the workers available to start developing them and putting them in. So I'll pause and see if that answered your question.
That was great. That gave me a lot of good feels. Now, did Maryland come up with any sort of incentive program to really attract these employers into this?
So yes, and what I would say is, there's incentive programs that are both driven specifically to an industry or to a occupation. There's also incentive programs that are developed for the expansion of a program like registered apprenticeship. So in Maryland, we've been very blessed. The governor has been extremely supportive about the expansion of apprenticeship. We have, over the years, we've had registered apprenticeship tax credits, which allows a tax credit Originally, it's $1,000 per apprentice registered. Now it's a $3,000 per apprentice registered tax credit. We've received some $12 million in U.S. Department of Labor expansion grants for registered apprenticeship, which in Maryland, we take very little, goes into salary and supporting of a program, but instead we turn that back over into the customer's hands, essentially, where we can reimburse employers for the cost of training an apprentice, reduce the amount that the schooling might cost, or even wage reimbursements in some cases. And then I mentioned previously the EARN program with $3 million dedicated dollars just to clean energy. So there's been a lot of incentives like that have come out, and they're meant to both incentivize the employers, but also to lower the cost of the highly skilled training that's needed, because it can be very expensive. And when you want to upskill, you want to scale up quickly, funding like that is instrumental.
That is exactly answers that question more than fully. So that's great. And that is exactly some of the points that I know here in New Jersey, people wanted to hear, what were the incentives like? And, that definitely answered that.
Patty,
Okay.
before we,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Before we move on, could I just jump in very quickly?
Yeah.
With it's Andrew.
Okay, I'm sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, with all the wonderful things that Maryland is doing, I guess I couldn't help myself but not want to chime in with some of the things that the state of New Jersey is doing as well. So many people will know that New Jersey has aggressively moved towards development of about 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind. And we've learned from other states like Maryland. And one of the things that New Jersey did is in the bid process itself for the leases, that it was built right into the workforce development, partnerships with labor, incentives were part of when we went and said, okay, if you really are serious about this to these large companies, this is going to be key. We have to train and develop the workforce and use, in our case, New Jersey's residents. And so, we've had the ability now to both look at some of the work, Patty, you did when you were part of the state government, what other states like Maryland has done, and use that as a jumping off point so that we could quickly put New Jersey's offshore wind programs literally on the map and make sure the workforce is there. So I just wanted to jump in. And I guess I have to say, I'm here with my PPL hat, but I didn't do it in my introduction. I'm also a member of the New Jersey State Senate, heavily involved in the development of clean energy, public-private partnerships. So I'll probably end up going back and forth between these two over the course of the conversation.
That's okay. That's okay. New Jersey they've come up with the GAINS grants. I'm sure most of you have heard about those, growing apprenticeship in non-traditional sectors. PACE, which also is the pre-apprenticeship program. There's OJT money, out there. So they are trying various attempts to get the cost of that training lower so that the employer can, manage it. And that's the number one thing, it's got to be employer focused. So I appreciate that input. And Chris, I definitely appreciate that question. But of course, I'm going to give you another one, Chris. I know you just want to hear this, right? Okay, question number 2. Predominantly, this is for Chris. Could you speak about a few types of policies that states have adopted to promote best practices in registered apprenticeship programs? So I think we may have covered some of that already.
Sure, but I think this is an area that we're talking to the whole country and we're talking to industry, and it's always best to delve deeper into your best practices. But I would say that one of the first and the primary best practices for Maryland has been staffing. Prior to 2015, Maryland was a very understaffed apprenticeship program. And like I said, we've had a lot of support from Governor Hogan, from the legislature, and really upscaling, I should say, apprenticeship within Maryland. And it starts with staff. We had a staff of about 3.5 people for years. We now have a staff of about 15. And where that comes from is when you have educated staff and when you have highly skilled staff on the field, just like in an apprenticeship program, whether you're doing offshore wind or whether you're doing telecommunications or whether you're doing IT infrastructure, you need staff that can talk to sponsors, talk to employers, talk to industries, understand their needs, work with them directly, and then help get them to the assets and resources that they need to expand their program. So that dramatic expansion has really helped Maryland scale up. We've gone from 7,300 apprentices in 2016 to the 11,250 I mentioned in my introduction. So it's been quite an uptick, and we're continuing to see that growth. We've added in numerous community colleges that become sponsors, which then brings more education into your system. And it really just tightens everything up. So I would say that the staff and infrastructure is absolutely something that states have to look at, because the employers do need that resource, both for doing the apprenticeship program, but as well as for connection to licensing and to some of those grants and those financial resources that you were asking me about a little bit ago. The other thing is creating an outreach tool. When you're looking for, this is a tight economy, it's a tight market. Employers everywhere are looking for talent. Having the ability to help employers is one way that you can connect to the Maryland Department of Labor, but also through our website, through where we have a locator where apprentices can log on, or potential apprentices can log on, and they can find the type of apprenticeship they're looking for. They can search by employer, occupation, trade, industry, or region, and it helps to really get them right to where they want to be in order to apply. We also connect very quickly with the local high school systems, helping to get more high school age students and graduates into apprenticeship programs. And then last, you have to be nimble. Government can often be viewed as slow. It takes us a long time to do things. Programs can take a long time to develop, but it doesn't have to be that way. When you have a highly skilled staff, they can help sponsors or employers quickly develop an apprenticeship program. They can vet it. They can match it up with other programs in the country, see who already has it, copy that model, and quickly get it registered in the state. New Jersey's on the call with us. It won't be the first time that we've stolen something from New Jersey or from Delaware or from Virginia. I'm not shy about reaching out to another state and say, do you have something for offshore wind? Do you have something for solar? Do you have something for IT? If so, what does it look like? Almost always, it's going to look very similar to New Jersey to Maryland. There may be a licensing nuance, but those are very small and easy to fix, easy to correct. Government doesn't have to be an obstacle. Government can absolutely be an ally to industry developing these programs. And then that feeds into the last part is, a best practice is making sure that industry, making sure that colleges, making sure that schools, apprentices, moms, dads, the PTA, teachers, that everybody realizes that at the end of a registered apprenticeship program is that nationally recognized credential. So if you're working in New Jersey or you're working in Maryland and you're a graduate of an apprenticeship program, it is very seamlessly to go from state to state. Very minor nuances might exist for licensing, but those are very quick to overcome. So having that best practice in place from your staff all the way to the development of your programs has been key to growth, in my opinion.
And I have to mention, Chris, that New Jersey has stolen from Maryland a few times. One who has actually done it. So I totally understand that. So yeah, and I always say we replicate with pride. So that's my little term there. Okay. And so I think I have now I'm on to the next question. And really, I think this is a good question for Marcus, but anybody can chime in. Okay, this is question number 3. Many people talk about pre-apprenticeship as something as informal as a soft skills training program, or as formal as a significant work-based learning experience. Could you share your perspective as to what constitutes a quality pre-apprenticeship program?
Thank you, Patty. And I think that this is the opportunity to be able to share the pre-apprenticeship model a little bit more fully. Really do obviously marvel in the opportunity, because I think that the model itself is definitely underutilized, not fully understood in terms of what it could actually provide to the space. And Pennsylvania is one of the states that does allow pre-apprenticeships to be registered with the state. So so our program, we do serve as a program sponsor for a few different pre-apprenticeship programs, and then we also partner with employers and training programs that feed directly into their apprenticeship program. So when we built our pre-apprenticeship, there were really 5 components that we knew we needed to have embedded into the program. The first thing that we wanted to make sure that our program had was transparent entry and success requirements. We needed to really clearly articulate what were the entry requirements for all the participants, including any type of stipulations on like academic prerequisites, employability skills, and in some cases even like social emotional skills. For those who were accepted into our weatherization program, we require for all of our participants to score at NRS level 4 or at the very least. So if we're thinking about like grade level, that's generally about like a 7th or 8th grade reading and math level. We felt as if the materials that we were going to be presented, not only from our standpoint, but also from the training partner standpoint, was written at a level that it wouldn't be frustrating to read the actual text, And our students would also, given the 20 weeks, be able to complete all 4 GED assessments within that span, given they were coming in at that reading and literacy, reading and math foundation. So once we would make that clear, and ultimately we also did have applicants that did not meet that benchmark, and we needed to make sure that we have some opportunities and other placement opportunities for them as well, because we don't obviously want them to just slip through the cracks. The second thing we really did emphasize was the alignment with the skills that are really sought by local employers in our high quality apprenticeship program. So before we actually submitted the request to have our pre-apprenticeship registered with the state, we put together a task force with, I believe it was like 8. It started off about 8 employers. I think it's now at 12, to really go through what are those skills that are really not only lacking, but also folks are coming in. For those who are coming into the organizations from an entry-level perspective, what are they seeing as those deficiencies or areas in where folks are just not getting, they're not coming in with that level of readiness as an employer would necessarily expect. So once we do understand what those skills are, we can build them into the curriculum and make sure they're built into like a range of different trainings and employment type of scenarios and opportunities and activities within the curriculum itself. Ultimately, we did want our pre-apprenticeship to have a culminating, all of it to culminate in at least one or more industry recognized credentials. Facilitating like earning credentials was extremely important. We wanted them not only to be able to support direct entry into the workforce, but also make sure that it's validated and really recognized, like not only locally, but also nationally across employers and also industry associations. And this was also identifying different credentials that we wanted to focus our pre-apprenticeship. They needed to be stackable and also portable as well. We didn't want for credentials to essentially just be isolated into one specific field or one specific job, because ultimately once you're going through a pre-apprenticeship, students may just within the 10th week understand that this may not be what they want to do. They want to move into another space within the sector, another space within the field. And we want to be able to have those credentials be either portable and obviously applicable to the different disciplines. The last 2 that we really did want to focus on was obviously development of skills through like hands-on activities, work-based learning. We did not want it to be like purely classroom instruction. Our program is about 40% classroom instruction and 60% completely hands-on activities, work-based learning. We wanted to make it clear to students what the skills that they were gaining and how are they ultimately going to be applied to a future career. We felt that when we were focusing purely on just GED or numeracy and literacy development, the retention rates were lower because of the fact that folks were still always asking the question about how is this applicable to what I'm actually going to be doing. Even if it was contextualized, it was like there's always a question about if I'm dealing with fractions or I'm dealing with probabilities, how does that directly relate and translate into what I want to do as part of a future career? And in many cases, folks do not know what they want to do, which makes answering that question even more difficult. So being able to have that directly tied to an industry, directly tied to a curriculum, just made that retention so much easier for the student, not only just for the actual agency. And then the last thing I did want to mention was just offering academic career exploration and very important wraparound supports. We partner with a number of different organizations. I think we're going to be touching on that a little bit later. But making sure that we're directing students to occupations that have clear career paths, creative also career paths that allow for folks to be able to come in at different entry points. Family sustaining wages, information about job opportunities, progression and development within those specific careers. And also the wraparound support such as tutoring or case management, access to childcare, mental health and transportation resources. And also in some cases, housing. We do work with a number of different agencies that ultimately do provide housing support for many of our participants, because they may be in transitional housing, they may be in halfway homes, they may be just coming home from incarceration and ultimately need to have that type of permanent housing option. So having those 5 components were really big for us to be able to have to obviously build the pre-apprenticeship, and then all the different components of it, we were able to kind of just like piece into those avenues.
Yeah, that was great. I know that I'm sure net.America and ICF are going to put some posts out, but one of the things I thought that some of the audience members maybe say, gee, I wish I got those 5 components down again. And so they may be asking you for that, Marcus. I could see, because that would be I think, a very important piece for someone who's establishing
absolutely.
a pre-apprenticeship program. And I love the 40-60 rule. I think that's a good thing. The 40% classroom and the 60% hands-on.
Mhm.
I think that's a great way to really start to get them to bridge into a registered apprenticeship program in an industry. So I really like that rule. So I imagine after we close this and net.America is going to follow up, that may be something they may want to include in their follow-up.
Great.
Okay. All right. Okay. So the next question on the agenda is: the work-based learning environment is inclusive of partners from industry, education, nonprofits, and government entities. Could you talk about some of your experience facilitating interactions between these groups and discuss how you have worked on aligning common messaging among these groups? So this is really is for Richard, but I think we can all chime into this. So don't hesitate. So we'll start with Richard, maybe.
Yeah, thanks. Partnerships are really at the core of a lot of what IREC does. It's just fundamental to any of the activities, all of our projects that we engage in is developing these partnerships. They're extremely important to make sure we're including, the diverse perspectives into this, all the stakeholders that have a key, stake in the process, have their voice included. If you don't have everybody together from the beginning, you're going to run into some issues in the long run. So it's really a core piece of what we do. We've got numerous examples of how we engage, these diverse stakeholders together. Certainly the project that I'm working on, the Solar Ready Veterans Network, is sponsored by Department of Energy. It is a cooperative agreement. So we've got the Department of Energy's involvement in the project, starting there with the government involvement. But we've got a number of tasks in there that are involved with creating these partnerships, getting stakeholders together. One is just to create partnerships, industry education partnerships, make sure that the education being provided is aligned with the industry needs. And so we've been reaching out to training providers and workforce partners and employers across the country to develop localized partnerships that are going to support the needs in their local areas. But we're also coordinating things at the national level, for instance, around the apprenticeship standards and training standardization across the industry. These are things that we're working with, nationally, convening a group of employers with the Solar Energy Industries Association as a key partner. As they've got over 1,000 solar companies that are members of their industry. So it's again, just using the partnerships like that, a nonprofit there that is that their role is to engage the industry. So we do a lot of work with them and other groups like them in other sectors of the clean energy industry. Our Solar Ready Vets is focused on solar technology. One activity we're doing right now is convening the National Clean Energy Workforce Alliance. So we started that this year with some funding from Bank of America Foundation. It really just gets to the heart of this question. It's getting everybody together, organizing all the stakeholders, identifying the issues, making sure all the voices are represented, and identifying the issues, and then identifying best practices and resources that can help address those. So when we create these best practices documents, we've got lots of resources on our website. And like I said, from regulatory issues in the industry. Another example, we convene a group called the Sustainable Energy Action Committee, SEAC. This is, it's designed to get code officials, building permit officials, fire department, emergency responders together with the industry to address issues around permitting and inspection and around making sure these systems are safe. But it's important to have all sides there at the table to address those things. So again, partnerships critically important to everything we do. One of the areas you want to make sure you're also, you can't do a training program and just have, the training providers are great at doing that. They know how to create the curriculum. They know how to, develop the education pathways, the evaluation techniques, assess the learning progress, et cetera. Employers, that's not their strength, right? But if they want to train their staff, it's important to have that partnership. The same on the other side, though, training providers, education system is great at developing that training. But we've got many examples over the years where, the training was developed without the industry engagement, and either they're putting out people in the wrong place and they're not able to find jobs in that area, or they're putting them out with potentially skills that aren't aligned with what the industry needs. So, it's really important that if you're developing, from the education side, you make sure you're getting that input from the trainer or from the industry, the employers that are going to be hiring their students. And if you're from the employer side, look, don't try to do this. There's a lot of great curriculum out there. If you want to do it right, if you want to train your staff, if you want to align to industry credentials and best practices, you've got to bring in those other, those other groups. And the last group I mentioned that's really important to involve as well is organized labor. So the unions, in particular, when you're looking at particularly like apprenticeship programs and other things around that, the workforce, the organized labor has a lot of workforce available. So it's finding the right ones there. None of these partnerships aren't easy. They can present challenges, but you've got to get everybody together to come up with some common understanding, or it's, you'll run into issues one way or the other. So it's important work. And that is a fundamental to a lot of what we do. So thanks for asking that question.
That was great. Yeah. Partnerships all the way around. If we didn't have those employer partners, we didn't have those supporting partners to help with that with the curriculum, it's what we do. Okay. All right. The next question also for Richard. So you're still on, Richard. There has been a lot of growth in energy apprenticeship opportunities. Could you discuss some of the occupations that we are seeing significant growth trends in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the clean energy industry is very broad. A lot of my work has been focused on the solar sector, and that's where I know a lot, but we're connected in with a lot of other areas. We've heard from offshore wind. We've heard, there's hydrogen, clean hydrogen, and certainly electric vehicles coming. So there's lots of different sectors, and we're starting to engage more in those areas as well. One thing I'd direct people to in regard to, where are the jobs, what are the types of jobs that are coming, is the IREC does the solar job census every year. We just actually released the latest version of that. And so that tells you, that goes into depth on the solar sector and what types of jobs they are, where they are. That's broken down into installation and construction. Then there's a section on manufacturing and other services as well. So you can look at that and see where the jobs are, where the trends are. That is the data that goes into that report, the solar job census on our site, is also driven by a broader clean energy report that the Department of Energy does called the U.S. Energy and Employment Report, the USEER. And that also, a new one just came out a couple months ago from 2021, analyzing that data. And that's looking at other sectors, weatherization, energy efficiency, wind, other sectors of the industry too. So that'll show you where the jobs are in different sectors. There's tons of opportunities all across the board for all different occupations. But, when you look at the jobs, the bulk of them are in both sales and installation. So we've got certainly, when you look at apprenticeable occupations, you've got a lot of the existing occupations in construction, certainly electricians with the move towards electrification of buildings, putting in electric vehicle car chargers in homes and residents, in businesses. Wind and solar, the geothermal, they all have an electrical components to them. So certainly electricians, construction laborers, roofers, and equipment operators, iron workers, all the existing trades. There's tons of opportunities for those. So there's always great pathways for getting jobs in clean energy. When you look at clean energy, one of the things I'm looking right now is, you really have to look where things are today versus where things were even 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. The industry today, when you look at the amount of power, just the power plants that are being proposed for today's grid, currently it's over 80% of the power plants in the transmission queue, like proposed to be built, are solar and energy storage. And the amount of solar and energy storage projects currently in the queue to being proposed to be built onto the grid is equal to the current grid that exists in terms of power plants today. So the amount of work coming is huge. Definitely, as we said, installation, lots of opportunities on sales. So when we look at installation, we've got all those existing occupations, but we're also interested in some of the newer occupations too. So wind turbine technician, solar installer. Those are some more, they're occupations that have been listed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics as among the fastest growing for several years now, fastest growing occupations in the country. But they are actually, wind turbine technician, I believe, is apprenticeable. Currently, solar installer is not an apprenticeable job. But there are other, these existing occupations that may be able to work to fill that role. We've got several programs that are training solar installers. They just have to use another occupational code to do so with the system. There's tons of investment going into the weatherization and efficiency, energy efficiency. So we see a lot of opportunities. Occupations that are approved are energy auditor and a weatherization technician or a home performance laborer. Doing the retrofit works in homes and businesses across the country. And also, there's manufacturing is a big push right now too. So you're going to see plenty of opportunities for, those are, locally with where a manufacturing plant gets built. The advanced manufacturing technologies, there's a lot of occupations there within the manufacturing realm. And to be honest, it's really across the board. So there's tons of software and IT development. So much of the development in the industry has happened on the software side of things with better sales platforms, design system tools, other things to integrate. There's just been tons of development there. There's whole conferences on software and security, cybersecurity. So we need, there's plenty of new occupations there. And then you look at ongoing maintenance of projects. Once they've been built, you've got the initial installation construction, but then there's growing demand for the people that are going to operate that equipment. And that could be a different skill set. So for example, on the electric vehicle chargers, a lot of that, the initial installations, definitely going to be an electrician involved, but a lot of the maintenance may be more on the software and technical side of things. It's troubleshooting it's rebooting software systems, it's things like that. So maybe a different role than the initial installer. So just again, wrap it up, occupations across the board. There's, customer service and sales management and things like that down, to obviously the people in the field doing the construction work is where there's going to be a lot of apprenticeships.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think you took in your question and even the question after it. So that's actually great. So one of the things and on this next question, and I think Marcus, you may have, I want to expand this a little bit. It says one of the underrepresented groups in energy registered apprenticeships are women. What would you recommend to not only recruit, but maintain women in completing their apprenticeship? And I wondered, and I think this may go to Marcus's work, do you have any success stories for those populations that are the hardest to serve, the ex-offender, those that are on government benefits, those that have a disability? So I just wondered, I guess we should focus on the women first and then the harder to serve. Did you have
Yeah, many of our employer partners express the same frustrations. We work with a number of pre-apprenticeship programs, either as a program sponsor or as a partner within the program, and their goal has generally been like 20 to 25% female retention, and had barely reached like 10, 15.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Totally relate to that. Yep.
I will say that within our pre-apprenticeships as a program sponsor, I think we've experienced a lot more success. One, because I think the pre-apprenticeship model has a little bit more flexibility that's built into the program itself. We've had a number of situations where, like from a transportation, the fact that we provide transportation to all of our participants is a huge barrier reduction. All of our students get a $500. We were able to establish, and this probably goes to the public-private partnership conversation, but all of our participants receive $500 credits every single month through a partnership that we have with Lyft to be able to get to our training site and also be able to get either back home or wherever they need to go after they're complete with the training. So oftentimes we'll have there might be an issue with a child at school, or there's an emergency phone call that needs to ultimately be taken care of. and as the primary caregiver, they immediately have to leave. And having that flexibility, being able to not only just still be able to participate in the program if you have to leave immediately, but also having transportation to get to these different sites without having to take public transportation or a bus or a train, not having to think about that, has been really helpful for our participants. Because historically what's happened was that we will have students who would come in, they would come in for in-person lessons, but they always have to have in the back of their mind what could happen at school and how much time it will take for that person to get to that actual location. It might be a daycare, it might be the school, it might be in some cases to the hospital. We had a number of students who kids had a history of seizures, and so it might be they might have to go directly to the emergency room, and it always has to be at the forefront of a person's mind. So if I know that the location of the training site is an hour away from where my child is located, that's going to directly impact my ability to be able to participate. Even if I definitely want to, obviously, like we're all committed to the program, but priorities obviously have to be taken paramount. I will also say that we have also started to partner with some of our local daycare centers for specifically, and this hasn't really worked for newborns because because there's the ratio in terms of having folks on staff per newborn. I think it's tight. But in terms of I think for adolescent children, there are a number of daycares that within the communities that we serve that we ultimately have been able to partner with and get discounted rates, or in some cases actually be able to pay for those services through either unrestricted funds that we were able to raise, or restricted funds specifically that was designed to be able to meet that barrier for some of our students. So I will say that our retention rates for the number of females that we have that we brought into the program is generally about 50-60%. Who've actually completed the program, either completed with their GED, been placed in the employment program, and received at least 3 certifications. So I think that we have been successful with that. But again, our program is a lot more flexible than many of the employer-registered apprenticeship programs that we partner with. Oftentimes, our employers tell us that if a person misses 3 sessions, they're automatically out of the program. And so, obviously, being able to figure out how that can work with a large-scale employer, I think will be crucial.
But you make some really good points in that you've been able to develop some systems and processes in place with your partnerships to help you support these folks finish their program and bridge to apprenticeship.
Yeah.
So that's a really important. Any other points regarding women in apprenticeship? Any other points anybody wants to make?
I'll just jump in and say mentoring within the apprenticeship program is really key. And at the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, we're just getting things started. We've looked carefully at our cohorts and want to make sure that the environment that we're putting them into is one of respect and nurturing and mentoring, because number one, we have people entering into a field that is really a future field and non-traditional. Number two, we have people who are looking around, and in the science field, tend to be predominantly men. And so when it comes to women, ensuring that we have good mentoring, good support services, and that we have constant communication has been key to getting our apprenticeship program off the ground. And as we grow, we'll grow that as well. So I just want to bring up that once you have them in, Marcus talked about all of the really critically wraparound services that are so important. I think it's, I don't say equally, but another piece is, what is that experience like as each of these participants are going through the apprenticeship program is really critical for retention.
Really good points, Andrew. And I just want to say this whole industry sector, is in that growth phase. We're still learning, we're still growing. I mean, Richard mentioned hydrogen, and I was wondering if hydrogen was even going to come up today. So, I think we're still in that learning and uncovering. And that's why I think the workforce development piece is so incredibly important, that there's an arm in there that is learning we're learning, how do we train? How do we get all this together? And I think education and higher education, can adjust also. So I think that's incredibly important.
And Patty, one thing I was going to say before when Richard was talking about hydrogen and green hydrogen in particular is really interesting because it bridges many of the existing sectors already. So green hydrogen
Right.
is about water using solar or wind, let's say. So now you need to have solar or wind. You need a new technology when it comes to pulling the hydrogen out of the water. And then you have pipeline issues because instead of pushing natural gas down a pipeline, we're talking about blending in hydrogen, or maybe one day it's pure hydrogen. And then you have the end use, right? And what does that end use need? And what are the technical skills that are going to be needed to adjust to a green hydrogen equipment and sector? So there's a lot of really interesting things that are going to happen over the next couple of years when it comes to green hydrogen.
100% agree. I agree 100% with you on that. But there's so much more to learn. And how's it going to work? And is it going to be good for the consumer? And, and will the consumer be able to afford it? And, all of those things. There's a lot to learn. And that's why I think we're in this growth phase. I think, now is the time to really educate the population that will be in there working in the trenches in this industry. I think it's really important. All right, I'm going to go to my almost the last question on this list here because we've said so much. It says some employers, I'm not sure exactly who this is for, so we can all spit out. Some employers are reluctant to sign up and establish a registered apprenticeship. And what would be the one key factor that you would tell those employers of the value of registered apprenticeship? So
I guess
I'm open. Go ahead.
I'll jump in since I'm representing an employer who just started an apprenticeship program. There's a couple of things, and I think Marcus mentioned it before, which is that all industries are struggling right now with finding skilled workforce, regardless of what your industry might be. And in our case, we looked around, we saw an aging workforce within our organization, and we saw also that many of the skills that we need, specialized welding, let's say, specialized machining of metals, there's a skill set that is sort of come out of favor, getting harder and harder to find skilled machinists, let's say, as one example. So the key here was having the management of the company understand that if we don't create the workforce, it's not clear where we're going to get it. And then it probably is economically advantageous to develop it through an apprenticeship program than to look for someone off the street and then have to, on the fly, figure out how we're going to develop the proper skill set. So, there's been an initial cost of getting any program off the ground, but the long-term ability to develop in-house a workforce trained to do the jobs that we need, and to know that they'll be there once they finish the apprenticeship program, and that they'll have the certification so that if they choose to go elsewhere, they'll be with this great skill set that applies to solar or wind or whatever else it might be, was key for us. And it turned out, at least in our case, it wasn't that much of a heavy lift to convince management not just to support this, but to put the financial resources in place to develop it, because they did the calculation that the money spent now would be well served and come back down the road. That was one. And then two, I mentioned mentorship before, and we're all busy and we're all being pulled in many, many different directions. And so convincing our existing staff to carve out some time for mentoring these young people for their on-the-job training was, again, something we had to have these conversations early. And we had to talk about the fact that there is just so much work to be done. Everybody feels like they're trying to do too much at once. And so the time spent mentoring and getting a young apprentice off the ground and developing skills that he or she could work independently was going to benefit the existing staff as well. There's a little bit of reluctance to that, but once they saw success, it just built on success. And what we're seeing now is that in-house, more and more people are saying, hey, how can I start working with an apprentice? Because they see that it's a win-win. So I think management and then with staff is key for any organization trying to get a apprentice program off the ground and make sure that it's successful and governed by best practices.
That's great. So essentially, it's building those leaders for them for the next generation, for the next time, for the whole population. What about the bottom line? Anybody else want to talk about the bottom line? How it can affect their bottom line?
Sure. So I think there's a couple points to really keep in mind. And first and foremost, everything that you've heard today has been spot on. Andrew's points were 100% accurate. Marcus's points as well. I would only add one thing. That it's a challenge, but I think it's worth the conversation for all of us to have with our employers, our industry partners. Richard mentioned, pulling together cohesive networks of everybody to work together, educators, labor, unions, associations, employers. But is the high school diploma always required, for example? There's certainly some occupations, and I'm not here to judge an occupation. We're talking about career occupations, but there's certainly some career occupations where it could be argued that a high school diploma is not necessarily required. So sometimes removing a barrier that might be artificially in front of an apprentice's path into an industry is well worth a difficult conversation. And by no means are we minimizing the value of a high school diploma, but we do know that there are populations within our country that now have a barrier in front of them to get into career earning levels. And a program like Marcus's can certainly get you there, even if you don't have a high school diploma.
Right.
But what I would add on to it is one of the values and one of the selling points of apprenticeship has always been the return on investment and the retention rate. I will use the U.S. Department of Labor studies. They show that somewhere between 91 and 94% of apprentices are still with the same employer about a year later. Maryland is undertaking one of those studies now. We're going back about 2 decades in data to figure out what that retention rate looks like at a state level. We suspect it's much higher. Yeah. But that's a phenomenal rate. And when I say much higher, I mean 91 and 94% over a much longer period of time. And then second, their data, U.S. Department of Labor's data shows something like $1.47 for every dollar invested is returned to the employer. Andrew just pointed out, employers and industry are having a hard time finding talent. I think those two factors together, you're holding on to your employees, you're upskilling to your employees, you're taking advantage of things like state funding, federal funding, grants, tax credits to offset costs, and you're returning on your investment. One of the things I think because you had originally started with, what is something we could tell employers about the value? So in addition to that, when you're talking to your apprentices, you're building up this program. There's the progressive wage scale. The apprentices enter knowing exactly where they start and where they end. They know their career path. They know the expectations. They know they're going to end up as an electrician or an IT specialist or a manager or a chef. There are so many occupations that are apprenticeable. I think that when you put all those values together, at the end, we have to remind the employers, this is not charity. These apprentices are working for you, and they're beginning to work for you day one. Whether it's a plumber's apprentice that's digging a hole in the ground while the journey worker is pulling pipe, or whether it's an electrician that's wiring something up while the apprentice is running out to the truck to bring up the red or the blue wire, right? You're keeping the journey worker working on the highest skilled part of the occupation while the apprentice learns and follows him or her up the chain. So, we're not asking for investment into employees that you're not getting a return on. You're investing in your company and your employees because it's good for you. It's good for the local economy. It's good for your community. And at the end of the day, you will have another highly skilled worker to expand your business or to machine those parts that Andrew has mentioned or to fabricate something. So at the end of the day, all of that kind of comes together to bring one of the most vital training programs, I think, in the history of our country. So I'll pause with that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was great. That was great. I'm the daughter of a tool and die maker who had a tool and die shop and went through many apprentices. And I always say to people, retention. People don't. When I was at Ford, those skilled tradesmen weren't going to leave Ford. Ford invested in them. Ford put money into them, put time into them, put energy into them, and they became the leaders at Ford. They grew after, they served their time. They went on, became supervisors, superintendents, and onward. So, yeah, I'm with you on this. I'm definitely with you on this one. All right. So this concludes our panel. I think I want to thank everybody. Everybody was really put their heart and soul into this. And I am sure they will be back in touch with us with any questions concerning Marcus. I'm sure they're going to want those 5 points of the pre-apprenticeship program. So thank you very much for your time. And we'll see everybody soon.